Island Bay to City Cycleway a good idea?
No. Yes.
Cycleways, oh, my microphone. Cycleways are a healthy means of mitigating climate change. And climate change is going to affect us all. It's going to affect you, and it's going to affect your family. The Island Bay to City Cycleway is a local example of the implementation of a policy which affects climate change. However, there has been some resistance, with 65 local Newtown businesses signing a petition against it. So we wanted to find out what the perceptions of these business owners were. And so we did a case study on it. And when considering those perceptions alongside the literature, we have come to some conclusions which may be surprising to you. Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Juliet Kane. Let me outline the route we will be taking today. So first of all, we're going to talk about climate change and health. Then we'll talk about the Wellington context, followed by our case study. Then we will discuss the barriers and recommendations. And then we will talk about inequities. And we'll finish up with question and answer time. That will take about 45 minutes or so. Now I'll pass you over to Emily, who is going to talk about health and climate change.
So let's look first at the wider issues of climate change and health. Climate change is an important global issue with serious worldwide implications for health. It requires immediate and ongoing action at an international, national and local level. If designed appropriately, climate change mitigation policy can also have significant co-benefits for health. This approach makes policy more cost-effective and more publicly acceptable. The transport sector has been the main focus for our investigation because it is a significant contributor to emissions and because policy in this area can be easily adapted to this dual-oriented approach. There is overwhelming evidence of the long-term health effects of climate change. These occur as a consequence of changes to temperature, sea levels and soil moisture. Direct health effects come from increases in extreme climatic events. These are the heat waves, the floods, the hurricanes, the things you hear on the news every day. But there are also many indirect effects, which come from changes to food and water availability, the geography of disease distribution, for example malaria, and changes to land availability and global stability. In response to this global threat, the United Nations developed the Kyoto Protocol. This is an international agreement which obligates all participating nations to set emission reduction targets. New Zealand's agreed to an unconditional 5% reduction in emissions, compared to 1990 levels, to be achieved by 2020. It's anticipated that we will have reached our target for the first commitment period, which was to reduce emissions to an average of 1990 levels between 2008 and 2012. This achievement takes into account carbon removal from land reforms and forestry. Now, it's because of these considerations that our nation appears on track. However, New Zealand is actually the 5th largest greenhouse gas emitter per capita in the developed world. Furthermore, even if we do meet this 2020 target, it is not sufficient to prevent anthropogenic climate interference. Current international targets through the Kyoto Protocol are inadequate to achieve the recommended emission reductions. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change estimates that there needs to be a global 40 to 70% reduction in emissions from the 1990 levels in order to prevent further global temperature rise. If we look now at emissions within New Zealand, as you can see on the graph, energy accounts for almost half of total New Zealand emissions. and of this, road transport is the largest contributor. Transport infrastructure in New Zealand is designed predominantly for private motor vehicles, which account for 80% of all trips. In fact, New Zealand has 1 car for every 2 people, one of the highest rates in the OECD. Now, because transport is such a large contributor to New Zealand emissions, and is predominantly something which each individual determines on a daily basis, it is a sector highly amenable to modification. Climate change is clearly a major threat to human health. However, there are many barriers to its mitigation, including political and financial pressure. Development of dual-oriented policy in the transport sector, which combines long-term climate change mitigation with short-term health targets, can be more cost-effective and therefore more publicly acceptable to implement. This is called the co-benefit approach. Such policy offers direct improvements in well-being, workplace productivity, and decreases in healthcare costs. In terms of health, there are 2 key aspects which can be targeted by transport policy: air pollution and physical inactivity. Air pollution is a significant cause of mortality and morbidity in New Zealand. This mostly comes through an increase in cardiovascular and respiratory disease. Air pollution directly accounts for over 1,000 premature deaths each year in New Zealand, and many more hospitalisations and restricted activity days as a consequence of illness. Strategies to reduce air pollution can decrease the rates of these prevalent diseases in our population. Switching short trips taken by cars to bicycles has been shown nationally and overseas to be an effective way to achieve this reduction. Now, a switch to active transport has the added potential of significantly improving physical activity. This is important because currently only half the New Zealand population meets the baseline recommendations for exercise. Many non-communicable diseases can be significantly improved by physical activity, and these are the highly prevalent ones: obesity, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, depression. Furthermore, the distribution of these diseases is inequitable. Maori and Pacific populations carry a much higher burden. The built environment is an important determinant of physical activity. Targeting infrastructure, urban design, and collaboration with other agencies, including the transport sector, has been shown to be effective at increasing population rates of physical activity. This includes interventions to promote cycling, such as the development of a cycleway. Lastly, safety. This has been identified as an important psychological barrier to cycling. However, there's a safety in numbers effect. This means that an increase in cycling may increase the total number of injuries occurring. However, the proportion of cyclists actually getting injured will decrease. And even with extra total injuries, the health benefits have been shown to hugely outweigh the risks. Now, infrastructure to improve safety, such as the development of a cycle lane, will further reduce injury rates and increase the perception of safety. So overall, climate change is an important long-term health determinant. Effective transport policy can play a role in its mitigation, and at the same time, significantly improve population health. There is compelling reason to develop dual-oriented policy. It offers greater overall benefit, making it more acceptable to implement. We will now consider transport policy with climate change mitigation in the context of Wellington City. I'll pass over to Andaley to explain this.
Wellington is already seen as a leader in climate change mitigation within New Zealand, with a lower carbon footprint than the rest of the nation. 82% of Wellingtonians have said that they are prepared to change their lifestyle if it will help to fight climate change. With the population forecast to increase, This will see an increase in carbon emissions. Therefore, the Wellington City Council has outlined targets in 2010 which aim to reduce further emissions. In Wellington, the transport sector contributes to 35% of these emissions, which equated to about 412,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide. Some of this is under the control of the central government and technologies, such as the development of new fuels. However, there are areas in which the city can help. Policies to encourage cycling, for example, can be a great way for the city to address this. I would now like to invite Oliver forward to talk about the strategies and recommendations set by the Wellington City Council.
So once we had gained an understanding of the Wellington context, we needed to consider what strategies were in place at the level of the Wellington Regional and the Wellington City Council. There are a number of initiatives which aim to create a more environmentally sustainable future. A few are listed here. So these include promoting carpooling, increasing the number of electric cars, and decreasing the need to commute through increasing internet-based forms of communication. However, our report focuses more specifically on strategies which involve transport mode shift from private vehicles to cycling. There are several strategies produced by both the Wellington Regional Council and the Wellington City Council which have this aim in mind. The Regional Land Transport Strategy, the Long-Term Plan, the District Plan, and the Wellington Transport Strategy all place importance on transport mode shift from private vehicles to cycles, and all outline the goal of cycling for short trips. Wellington City leads the nation in the percentage of people who take public transport, walk, run, or cycle to work. And over the previous 10 years, car use has dropped and use of cycles as a means of commuting to work has increased. However, when we look at all trips made in the Wellington region, not just those commuting to work, this picture changes somewhat. The transport mode share of cycling of all trips in the Wellington region is estimated at only 1 to 4%. The strategies mentioned aim to increase this figure. Specifically, the Regional Land Transport Strategy aims for a 2020 target of increasing active mode share up to 30% of all trips in urban areas. The Regional Land Transport Strategy further expands on this goal, with the aim of people generally walking or cycling for short and medium length trips, and with the additional aim of ensuring that cycling networks are provided and they are convenient and safe. The Regional Council's in order for the cycling network to be improved, a review of the current cycling network needs to be conducted, which identifies important local routes and connections. The Regional Council's Cycling Action Plan states that improvements need to be implemented which address the deficiencies identified by these reviews. Along these lines, a regional cycling network map was made in 2012, which highlighted cycle routes connecting the centres in the Wellington region. From this map, it was estimated that Wellington region had approximately only 44 kilometres of on-road cycle paths and only 68 kilometres of shared sealed paths. But this appears to be a fairly small amount for the region, which encompasses over 8,000 square kilometres and includes the nation's capital city. So clearly there's some room for improvement in this area. However, the amount of progress that has actually been made in reviewing the current cycle network and implementing improvements remains unclear. The Wellington City Council's transport strategy also encourages transport mode shift. This strategy aims to support people who prefer to cycle through providing a safe and convenient cycling network. The Wellington Towards 2040 policy outlines the goal of being a city of connected cycling networks and emphasises that quality and well-located facilities are the key to making cycling more safe, more convenient and more enjoyable. Currently, there are a number of bus lanes in the Wellington region which are shared between bikes and buses. This policy aims to place an emphasis on an expanded bus priority network as a means of implementing a cycle network. In addition, the Council identifies several opportunities to provide dedicated parallel cycle lanes alongside these hybrid bus and bicycle cycle lanes. But there is no mention made to the intended coverage of these cycleways. There's only a reference to there being 19 cycleways in the future. However, a report has recently been finalised on the 19 cycleways and more specifics about their location. But regardless of that, at present, it appears that there is a gap between policy and practice when it comes to the provision of cycleways in Wellington. Expenditure is another good indicator of the priority that the Wellington City Council places on transport mode shift from private vehicles to cycling. In 2008, the city spent $70,000 on cycling facilities. However, this number dramatically increased to $4.3 million for the 2014 to 2015 budget. This increased funding will be spent on implementing safe cycle routes citywide, and it goes to show the support the Wellington City Council has for cycling and transport mode shift. So in summary of this, this aspect of our research has allowed us to see that the Wellington Regional Council and the Wellington City Council support transport mode shift from private cars to cycling. Additionally, both councils have documented strategies and goals for supporting cycling and implementing cycleways. However, these strategies appear yet to be fully translated into reality, although we acknowledge that these plans are ongoing matters. I would now pass on to Phoebe to talk about the Island Bay Cycleway specifically.
So some of you might ask, why Island Bay? As Oliver has already highlighted, cycling is a big focus for the Wellington City Council, and Island Bay is one of 19 strategic networks being explored. Island Bay is suitable due to its large population, its likelihood for growth, and its geography. The aim is to bring cyclists from the suburbs into the city, while decreasing congestion, making Wellington a more livable city, and bringing other co-benefits. As you can see, there are 4 sections in the Island Bay to City Cycleway. The first is the furthest along, and it goes through Island Bay. The second goes through Newtown and Berrinpore. That's what we'll be focusing on today. And the third and fourth sections are yet to be discussed in detail due to other transport developments in those areas. So looking at Section 1. Section 1 is relatively straightforward, as the parade road is quite wide. The Council has already received submissions and a petition on this. The Council has attempted to engage the community, although there has been some controversy around this. The majority of submissions voted to have curbside cycleways, which means the cycle lane would be in between the footpath and the parked cars. Section 1 is still in the consultation phase. Now moving on to Section 2. Section 2 is more relevant to us as medical students and residents of Newtown and Berrinpore. The aim with Section 2 is to have multiple cycle routes forming a cycle network. This is quite a complex thing to achieve, and there are many options with no obvious starting point. To address this, the Wellington City Council has started a Citizens Advisory Panel. This comprises 16 members, all Wellington citizens. 6 of these members specifically represent the residents, the retailers, cyclists, and users of the town belt. The panel has created a list of criteria, and these criteria are used to evaluate each of the routes. Using this criteria, 3 routes have been looked at in really good detail. So as you can see here, routes 1, 2 and 3. Routes 1 and 2 are likely to proceed first. These recommendations will go to the Council, and the Council will make a final decision. Without a lot of information, it is difficult for the public to really understand the breadth of this process when deciding to put in cycleways. There are some unavoidable limitations. For example, Rintoul Street is destined to be a road for rapid bus transit, which would make it a lot less suitable for a cycleway. and Adelaide Road has a very steep hill leading up to McAllister Park, which has a gradient greater than 8%, which is the recommended maximum for cycleways. Some of you may have heard that there has been a petition started by Newtown business owners. This raised concerns about loss of car parks, loss of business, and possibly increased congestion due to this implementation of a cycleway through Newtown. This petition was signed by 65 retailers. Considering these concerns from Newtown business owners, we thought it would be really valuable to explore this further with a case study. I'll now pass you on to Yusa to talk about this.
This brings us to our case study. The primary aim of our study was to assess the opinions of Brideford Street business owners towards the proposed cycleway going from Island Bay to the city centre. We designed an interview containing 4 open-ended questions, followed by a series of prompts when information wasn't volunteered. Pairs of students went out and interviewed business owners using these questions. So the first question was, what do you think about the proposed cycleway through Newtown? This question was followed by prompts regarding the advantages and the disadvantages of the cycleway. The second question, what are your views on cycling as a means of transport? And the third question, what do you think the point of the proposed cycleway is? The fourth question allowed business owners to make any further comments that hadn't already been mentioned. The questionnaire was constructed with the aim of finding out information on the Newtown business owners' perception of the proposed cycleway, its effects on their business, and their views on cycling in general. We interviewed business owners until we felt that saturation had been reached. This meant that we could predict what sorts of comments would be made and no further information was being found. Saturation occurred at 19 interviews. Interviews were then transcribed and analysed at a number of stages in order to come up with the key themes. During analysis, we ranked the themes in 2 ways. Firstly, by frequency. This was the number of interviews which mentioned the theme. Secondly, we ranked the most important themes by emphasis. Each pair decided which theme they felt the business owner most strongly emphasised. We also identified themes that did not fit into these 2 categories but were deemed important or unique. We decided to analyse the 5 most important themes as categorised by emphasis, as we felt that these were the ones that represented the Newtown business owners' opinions most accurately. I will now run you through some of the strengths and limitations of our study. So an expected limitation of the study was that we as medical students conducted the interviews. As medical students, we have been taught about the potential health benefits of cycling, and as a result, this may have introduced some interviewer bias. To minimise the effects of this, however, we used set questions which were open-ended and impartial in nature, in order to allow the business owners to convey their emotions without the influence of the interviewers. The questions also strengthened the study design as they improved the consistency between the interviews. Another limitation we encountered was during the analysis process, when comparing the emphasis placed on each theme by the different business owners. In order to overcome this, we analysed the data in a number of stages. First, individually, and then as a pair, and then amongst the wider group. This improved the rigour of the study. We were also able to look at the interview transcripts in order to gauge the wider context of the interview. I will now pass you on to Aaliyah, who will summarise the main findings of our study.
As Yusa mentioned, we decided to analyse the key themes by emphasis rather than frequency, as we felt that this would better represent the opinions of the business owners. So what did we find? As you can see by this chart here, we identified that the top 5 key themes that were most emphasised by business owners were safety, the impact of the cycleway on business, the practicality of implementing the cycleway, the road user attitudes of both cyclists and motorists, and lastly, the uncertainty of uptake of the cycleway. So to begin with safety, there were both positive and negative opinions on how the cycleway would impact on safety. Some owners thought that the cycleway would improve safety for cyclists, with one owner saying,
They can cycle without fear of being scraped by a car or bus.
Others, however, felt that the cycleway would negatively impact on safety, with another store owner saying,
Cycleways will cause more congestion, more aggressive driving because there will be traffic jams, and probably more bikers getting injured because of that.
Overall, business owners were concerned about safety and they were interested in how to improve safety. However, the approach to achieve this differed. The impact of the cycleway on business was the second most emphasised theme by business owners. Their main concern was that the removal of car parks would lead to a reduction in business. This was mentioned by many business owners, as expressed by the following statement.
Immediate parking for customers who just want to stop, grab a quick takeaway coffee. That's not going to happen anymore. If it goes ahead, I could lose quite a lot of business.
Overwhelmingly, there was a negative view on how the cycleway could impact on business. This removal of car parks leading to a reduction in business was a common outlook shared by the business owners down Riverford Street. The third most emphasised theme was the practicality of implementing the cycleway. Most business owners thought that implementing a cycleway through Newtown wasn't really acceptable because the roads were just too narrow. One business owner said,
Fire engines, cop cars and ambulances already have a hard path to go through.
In addition to this comment, many business owners expressed their concern that a cycleway would worsen the congestion that currently goes on in Newtown. In addition to this, another point highlighted was that New Zealand roads, and in particular those in Wellington, were not built to accommodate a cycleway, as shown by the following statement.
In Holland and Europe, roads were built with bikes in mind.
Another theme commonly highlighted by business owners were the ideas and attitudes of both cyclists and motorists, and the idea of mutual respect between the two groups. Most store owners expressed a negative view towards cyclist attitudes, with one owner saying,
You get cyclists who think they own the roads.
Despite this, most store owners did acknowledge that a change in attitudes needed to occur in both groups in order for the cycleway to be effective, as shown by the following statement.
There needs to be more education about it. They, cyclists, need to show courtesy. It should go both ways.
The fifth most emphasised theme, and the last that we analysed, was the uncertainty of uptake of the cycleway. One store owner expressed,
My main concern is that the cycleway is going to get watered down or not utilised. That would be my biggest fear. The whole theory is build it and people will come, but you really need to encourage them to make use of it.
in addition to this statement, Wellington weather conditions, as well as the potential for cyclists to disregard the cycleway, were identified as important barriers to level of uptake. In addition to the 5 key themes, we identified that information disparities between business owners was an important issue surrounding the cycleway. There were differing ideas about the routes of the cycleway, with one owner stating,
They would come and put it outside here along the road, Riverford Street, and there would be no parks.
whereas another owner said,
They raise way of going through Adelaide Road.
during our interviews, business owners emphasised that information, or specifically lack of information surrounding the cycleway, was an important issue. Although we did focus our analysis on the key themes most emphasised by business owners, to finish off, I'd like to highlight some of the themes that were frequently mentioned and that I have not yet discussed. These were the potential health benefits of the cycleway, traffic. There were both positive and negative opinions on how the cycleway would impact on the flow of traffic through Newtown, cost of implementing the cycleway, both on the individual and governmental level, the potential flow-on environmental benefits of the cycleway, and lastly, the role of cycling in New Zealand as compared to overseas. I would now like to pass on to Xavier and Claudia, who will talk you through our discussion.
Unfortunately, in Wellington, perceptions of poor cycle safety are backed up by injury statistics. During the 2007 and 2011 period, cyclists were involved in 12% of road injuries and made up 14% of all fatal crashes. This is despite the fact that cyclists were responsible for 2.6% of all trips taken. Cyclist safety can be split into two parts: perceived safety and actual safety. And these are both barriers in cycling in their own right. Firstly, we identified before that with the implementation of a cycleway, there may be physical separation between car users and the cyclists. And this has been shown to increase cycle safety. Because of this research, cycleways are therefore seen as a safer way of cycling and could increase the perception of society on cycle safety. With more people encouraged to cycle and more people cycling, we also get something called safety in numbers, which was described earlier. Backed up by research, this theory shows that the more cyclists there are, the safer the cycling is for everyone in the group. Now, we also looked into current initiatives run in the Wellington region that address cycle safety, specifically increasing it. These included pedal ready, bike buddies, and also bus bike workshops. Although there isn't much research in New Zealand on these programs and the effectiveness on them, international studies show that similar programs do show that they are effective, and people leave these programs with increased knowledge and skills that better equip them for cycling on the road. The issue with these programs, though, is the capacity is set very low. For example, the bus bike workshop, which takes bus drivers and cyclists and kind of runs a workshop to compare so that people can understand each other's situation on the road, only takes up about 60 places per year, and I think there's 400 or 500 bus drivers in Wellington at the moment, so capacity does need to be increased. And so this is one of the first recommendations that we would like to make. And that is that as more people start cycling, more safety programs could be offered, and with the implementation of the island-based cycleway, both perception and actual safety should improve.
So a major concern of business owners was that they'd lose sales if a cycleway were implemented. And this is a really valid concern, and one that we obviously expected would come up. So what does the evidence say? Research has shown, both internationally and locally, that while cyclists spend less per shopping trip, they tend to shop more often, overall spending more money than drivers. And, while obviously not great for equity, as Tyler will discuss later on, cycling is also currently associated with those with higher incomes, so people using the cycle lanes may have a greater disposable income. In terms of the actual cycleway though, a few studies have looked at business before and after implementation of a cycleway. While it's hard to say that any changes in sales were because of the cycleway, it's important to note that sales were only shown to increase or stay the same after the implementation of a cycleway. On that note, one major point that we need to address is that we still don't know where the cycleway will go. It may not go down Ridderford Street, and businesses may not actually lose car parks. On the topic of car parks though, one thing that we propose is the purchase of a local Newtown section to then convert into a car park. This would obviously need to be investigated for money and other practicality reasons, but it could alleviate the concerns surrounding car parks. In conclusion, while we don't have information specific to Newtown, we have found no evidence of a cycleway being harmful to business.
Now, we've all probably been involved in a cyclist-car feud at some point. And so there's general consensus that around the world, internationally, this is an issue, and that is the behaviour between cyclists and car users. An Australian study surveyed 1,800 cyclists in Queensland and found that 76% of males and 72% of females had experienced harassment at some time in the past 12 months by motorists. However, it is important to note that this does go both ways, and there have been surveys on car users trying to identify factors that upset them about cyclists, and one of these was cyclist behaviour on the road. So going back to the skills programs, the recommendation of increasing the capacity and the availability of these programs could, one, address the education of cyclists on the road, and two, if we look at the potential of there being a physical separation between cyclists and car users with the implementation of a cycleway, it is less likely that these two groups will clash, and this has been shown by evidence. So is the road wide enough, and do we value car parks or cycleways, and which roads will the cycleway go down? Are just some of the questions that are being addressed by the Council and the Citizens Advisory Panel. And as already mentioned, one of the major issues with Newtown is that the roads are really narrow. And so it is, at the moment, it stands that the cycleway may cause reallocation of car parks. A recent study on Tory Street did look at the removal of car parks along Tory Street and found that those car parks only equated to 3% of the total car parks available in the entire area. Now, Newtown and Tory Street are slightly different, Newtown being more central, but what this highlights is that if we could look at further research in the Newtown area, the availability of car parks in the surrounding area, or as Chloe mentioned earlier, look at alleviating car park issues through increasing car park availability, this issue could be addressed. And furthermore, we need to reiterate that it still isn't decided or confirmed that the cycleway will go down Ridderford Street and will affect reallocation of car parks. Another major concern raised was, if the cycleway is built, will people actually use it? So there have been two local studies undertaken in 2013 and 14 addressing demand for cycling. Jean Beetham surveyed Wellingtonians online and in person in Tory Street and then classified them into groups according to the likelihood that they would cycle. The group with the lowest likelihood of cycling still viewed cycling as an overall favourable means of transport. Tom Pettit conducted an online survey and found that 76% of the Wellington population over age 18 would consider cycling if improved infrastructure, such as separated cycle lanes, was provided. He also found that while 31% of respondents said that their preferred mode of travel was by bike, only 9% of them were actually currently doing so. Both studies concluded that many Wellingtonians want to cycle, and they would be much more likely to do so if there was a cycle lane. On top of this, the southern suburbs currently have the highest percentage of people cycling to work in Wellington City. 7.7% of people in Newtown, for example, cycled to work on Census Day last year. So, if any area of Wellington is likely to have high use of a cycleway, it is this one. and just some further recommendations that we came up with. So the first one was regarding communication between council and stakeholders. So when looking into our study specifically, it was identified by business owners that there was a lack of information given to them. And upon, furthermore, when we analysed our data, we found inconsistencies between some of the business owners' knowledge on the Cycleway. However, we also researched online, we found online on the council's website that they have actually reviewed their consultation process previously, and what they found is stakeholders continuously mentioned a theme of consultation fatigue. And so this is where stakeholders thought that there was over-consultation by the council and that the council should just get on with the job. So these two disparities highlight that there needs to be a balance found between in communication between both parties. Another barrier to that could determine another barrier could be determining who has responsibility for the matter. So the regional cycling plan identifies the authorities involved in the matter, but does not actually specify the groups and the actual groups involved. So we recommend that all agencies should or need to have consistent aims in getting ways of getting a cycleway implemented. And lastly, funding. So we believe that money percentage of the transport budget should match the percentage of mode share for cycling, at the very least. And nationally, this doesn't seem to be the case. For example, one of the more recent data, I think, suggested that 0.2% of the total budget was allocated to cycling facilities. And if you take the lowest percent at 1% for cyclists as the total transport users, there's clearly a disparity here. However, on a positive note, Ollie mentioned that Wellington has increased funding on cycling facilities by about 230%. So firstly, we encourage that nationally we should increase funding to match at least mode share, but if we want to cause a mode shift, then we might encourage more funding to be offered. And secondly, Wellington, we encourage that the increase should continue. And now Tyler's going to address the ideas around each week.
Alright, hello, my name is Tyler. I'll be talking about equity today. So equity is pretty important to consider in any sort of project that the government goes through. We don't want to widen any inequities that we have already or reduce, and we want to help try and reduce them. So there are some pretty important documents out there which talk about equity and why we have to consider them. We've got things like the Ottawa Charter, and obviously more close to home is the Treaty of Waitangi. So we've got to think about the impacts that the Cycleway is going to have on these inequities. And one of the big things that the Wellington City Council talks about is everyone's got the right to have access to healthcare. We think that cycling provides a low-cost means to have access to healthcare, and it's quite important that we encourage that. So we think cycling actually has the opportunity to reduce inequities in society by providing more access. Specifically, on the New Zealand sort of front, we've got to think about Māori. Treaty of Waitangi Article 3 states that Māori have a right to have equitable outcomes as to non-Māoris. So when we're building something like this, we've got to really think about it. In terms of the Wellington City Council, 7.6% are Māori. And when we get into the districts that are going to be affected by the Cycleway, the percentage of Māori living there actually increases further. So it's very important that we get them involved with any sort of project that's been built there and any discussion that goes on. So accessibility, we've also got to consider when we're building the Cycleway, who we're going to affect, who won't use the Cycleway, who can't use the Cycleway. One that's really important is obviously anyone with a disability or the elderly. The car can often be a tool for their independence, and if the Cycleway affects that, we can actually be causing inequity in society. But we also got to think that there's another argument where more people cycling may actually reduce road congestion and actually free up more parks, which could help people in that sort of situation. So cost. Cycling's a low cost sort of an option, which is pretty beneficial in terms of trying to reduce inequity. Obviously it's got a startup cost, but once you've got your bike, you're sort of on the road and you're good to go. Whereas obviously cars, they're a bit more expensive to maintain, and obviously buying one's also more expensive. You've got Warren Fitness and you've got everyday weekly cost of petrol. It's been mentioned already as well though that bicycles are actually commonly associated with people with high incomes. We think that's something that can be addressed. It might just be sort of historically associated with the fact that bikes were recreational and we're trying to make a shift with them being an actual transport option. But that's something to be considered. In terms of recommendations for inequity, we think that you've got to educate people about the cycleways. It's important that everyone knows that the cycleways are there, they're for everyone and people can use them. If people don't, the uptake might not be the same amongst all people in society. Alternative parking is important. For anyone who's elderly or disabled, they have to have access to the stores. And if we remove parks that allow them to get there, that can be inequitable. And in terms of Māori, it's important that we consult with iwi. Are we doing anything wrong? Is there more that we can do? These are questions that we need to ask, and discussion will help foster that. In terms of the low socio-economic status, it's hard to afford a bike. Some people have already bought a car and this is another cost which maybe they can't afford, and we think that maybe the government needs to look into subsidies for helmets, bikes, maybe for their children. Don't know how it goes, but it's something to be considered and discussed. So I'll pass on to Rosie now, who's going to do a final conclusion, and yeah, thank you.
Climate change is a very real and pressing issue that affects each and every one of us. Even if we meet these international guidelines to reduce carbon emissions, these efforts may still not be enough to mitigate all the threats that climate change poses. The transport sector is a large and increasing contributor to these emissions. However, it is also very amenable to change and therefore a key target for climate change policy. Cycleways are an example of a cost-effective way to encourage mode shift within the sector and reduce emissions. They also have the advantage of providing many health co-benefits, such as the positive effects from increased physical activity and indirectly from decreased air pollution. Despite mounting research supporting their effectiveness, necessity and urgency, there are many barriers to implementing such policies. This can be seen right here with the Island Bay Cycleway. Our case study identified 5 key issues regarding the opposition from business owners in Newtown: safety, effect on business, practicality of implementation, attitude of road users, and fear of lack of uptake. These barriers are consistent with what we found in the literature. However, further research indicates that many of the identified concerns are unlikely to pose a significant threat in reality. Evidence suggests the cycleway will actually increase safety, have no negative effect on business, with some studies suggesting business will actually improve, and dramatically increase cycling uptake in the area. We therefore postulate that the root cause of this opposition is in fact due to a lack of adequate communication between parties regarding these issues and the cycleway in general. So, to answer our question, do we believe the island-based cycleway is a good idea? Yes. And with improved communication between policymakers and stakeholders, in addition to ensuring all contributors work towards a common goal, we think the public might just agree with us too.
I'd like now to get the rest of the team up.